very much. So, as the National Library of the host nation for this year's ETD conference, I think it's probably fitting for me to give you an update on those topics which have just been listed: the doctoral research environment, university repositories, PhD theses, and EThOS. But with maybe 20 minutes or so to talk about these enormous topics, I was wondering where on earth to start and how to keep things manageable, and I'll come to that in a minute. But first, a little bit about the British Library. I've described the British Library to a few people this week at the conference, and particularly about our two sites, one in the north and one in London. I realised yesterday that Leicester is exactly the same number of miles distant from each of the two library sites, according to Google Maps. I've also tried to describe the somewhat light-hearted, tongue-in-cheek, north-south divide that perhaps exists between colleagues north and south. In central London, 3 minutes walk from King's Cross, St Pancras, Euston stations, round the corner from two universities, the new Crick Biomedical Research Institute, the new Google European headquarters being built in an area now known as the Knowledge Quarter. We have 10 reading rooms, including a brand new newspaper reading room dedicated to newspapers, exhibition galleries, events, inspiring public spaces, cafes, and free Wi-Fi throughout. In the north, in the middle of nowhere, on an industrial estate just off the motorway, we have a 7-storey concrete building, 1960s asbestos ceilings, and an ageing workforce. In the south, my colleagues are bright young things, full of ideas, energy, ambition. But London is also where the lighter, frilly side of library life takes place. Our press office is there. They do marketing, engagement, strategy. The design team is in London, events management, and the welcome team. Boston Spa, on the other hand, is where the real library work takes place. Legal deposit, ingest, cataloguing, metadata, document delivery, and of course, delivery of the EThOS service. But there's one thing that unites colleagues north and south and puts all our regional differences to one side. And that is the delicious 5-item breakfast offered at both staff restaurants. A frequent topic of discussion between colleagues, fantastic value, easily digestible, sensible sized portions that leave you wanting more. I decided to emulate the BL breakfast and present today the 5-item conference paper. So these are the 5 items which I'm just very, very briefly going to hopefully briefly facilitate. You need to stop me. I'm going to say very little about EThOS because I hope you've all visited at least once, and I hope some of you at least are regular users. In the last 2 years, we've focused on the basics, improving the quantity and quality of the metadata, increasing both content and visitor numbers, sharing the data with Google Scholar, Primo Central, many other services, as well as working with Hussein at the NDLTD Union Catalogue to get the data listed and to enable OAI harvesting. So just kick off with a few figures. This is a snapshot of a search results page, which of course you're all extremely familiar with. We currently have 350,000 records, and at least some records from every university in the UK which awards PhD theses. This is a snapshot of a typical record. So this one is a thesis awarded by University of Exeter, and you can see in the middle of the screen the 2 blue links tells me straight away that the thesis is available, a full text open access thesis is available. and we link either directly to the university repository where the thesis might be available, or users can download from within the EThOS database. We currently provide access to around 130,000 full-text open theses, and the 3 lines on this particular chart, if you can see them, I mentioned there's 2 options for providing that access. The blue line at the bottom shows the increase in the number of records with links to university repositories. The green line shows the growing number of PhDs held within the EThOS database, and the red line is a combination of the 2. So we can see straight away that there's quite a big overlap between those 2 access routes. Usage is growing all the time. This shows the usage for the last 3 years, and we can see that there's a pattern in month-by-month usage depending on the period of the academic year, from August through to July. And the red line is the year that we're in at the moment, and we hope and expect usage to continue to grow as more and more content is added. So, moving on to national expectations, that's EThOS, but what about the context in which we operate? Well, Kevin Shearer yesterday already told you quite a bit about the open access policies of the major public funding bodies. Institutions are now in the UK very focused on the big changes needed in relatively short time relating to their research outputs and their institutional repositories, especially to meet the requirements of the next REF from 2016. Neither the Research Council's UK policy nor the HEFCE open access policy overtly apply to PhD theses, but they are focused mainly or entirely on journal articles and conference papers. More significantly, the UK has no national policy or mandate for the deposit of theses or the reporting of their existence to the British Library or any other body. Institutions each develop their own policy and systems for how students submit their theses, whether they're e or print, whether they're held locally or fully openly, and whether they're reported to or ingested by the British Library. But in spite of that, most institutions do already have a mandatory policy or are moving towards one. And we can certainly see that open theses are being embraced by UK higher education. In fact, there is one expectation, although it's not a mandate, that PhDs will be made open. The Research Council's UK training grants is their funding route to PhDs in the UK. And there's an expectation stated in their terms and conditions that PhDs will be deposited into an open access repository. And that's the quote from the terms and conditions there. This expectation at the moment isn't policed or promoted, but we have representation from the Research Council's UK on the EThOS Advisory Board, and we have a regular dialogue with them and other funding bodies to discuss the future of open access PhDs. So watch this space. In terms of metadata, there is so much that can be said and so little time to say it. So I'm going to mention just 3 elements that are occupying our minds at the moment. The first of these is author identifiers. I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with EThEses. The International Standard Name Identifier System is assigned by authors of works. So it's slightly different to ORCIDs, which is claimed by living researchers. An EThNE can be assigned to a researcher that no longer publishes, or in fact is no longer alive. We recently submitted all 350,000 EThOS authors to the EThNE system, and 75,000 of those matched against an existing EThNE. A further something like 50,000 are in the process of being matched through a second process to see how many of those with a little bit more work can be matched. One of the challenges, of course, with author identifiers for PhD theses is that the PhD is often the very first work that a researcher will publish, so they don't necessarily have an existing record in identifier systems. As far as ORCID is concerned, hopefully some of you will go to Tom Demaranville's session tomorrow morning, where he will describe a developing importer tool which allows researchers to import the information about their thesis held in EThOS into their ORCID profile. We understand that ISNI and ORCID are cooperating, and who knows what the future will bring for both systems. But at the moment, we're really pleased to be working almost in parallel with those two systems. At the moment, none of that identifier information is accessible or visible from the EThOS service, and we need to do some further technical development our end to enable that data to be made available. My second element of metadata is sponsoring body. Traditionally, I don't think sponsoring body was a catalogue field. It wasn't an element that people were particularly interested in. But with the expectations around open access and the need to demonstrate impact both of the research taking place in the universities and also the impact of the funding itself, there is increasing expectation and desire to be able to record the sponsoring body of the PhD. One of the challenges is that there isn't a single authority list of funder names that is used widely across the UK. And we, I guess, are really watching this space to find out what happens. There's a set of guidelines developed by JISC and others called REOCS, which applies to every institutional repository content type as well as theses, but that is doing some work towards developing some guidelines for funder or sponsor body information. And we're just waiting now for REOCS version 2 to be released for consultation. And finally, my third metadata element is thesis identifiers. So the famous word identifiers keeps coming around and round. So I think we've all agreed, and we've probably discussed it by now several times at the conference, we think that to have an identifier system for thesis, perhaps like an ISBN, probably like a DOI, would deliver a lot of benefits. It would provide a match key, which would immediately help with deduplication. It would make it easier to cite theses and to link from, for example, the bibliographic information in the thesis, or to link from the thesis to the underlying data set, which might be held somewhere else. And it would reduce link rot. So Heather, my colleague, who lots of you will have spoken to today already, have already been thinking quite hard about whether or not to push ahead with developing some sort of facilitation by the library for UK higher education to develop some way of allowing DOIs for theses to be assigned to all UK theses. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to organise a workshop for UK participants later this year, towards the end of the year, I would imagine. In terms of business model and sustainability, I think Kevin again yesterday mentioned that EThOS has gone through 3 iterations of its business model in maybe 9 years now. So the first one was very, very focused. When EThOS launched, it was very focused on digitisation of print theses. It was a fantastic offer. Immediately, overnight, 250,000 theses records went openly available for the thesis to be ordered free of charge by any end user around the world. The cost for that scanning process was picked up by the UK institutions which participated at that time. I've put here that it was too good to be true, and in fact it was, because obviously demand went sky high. The British Library apparently had piles of theses waiting to be digitised that reached the ceiling. They bought new scanners, they put night teams on, they extended the digitisation unit, but nevertheless, the system had lots and lots of challenges. On the other as well, universities, of course, ran out of money very quickly because they were funding 10 times more theses than they were expected to fund. So a couple of years ago, we introduced a membership system whereby individual universities who supported the concept of EThOS would pay an annual subscription. This focused the mind. It was useful and very helpful because it gave us about 2 years where we at the British Library realised that we really had to deliver a sustainable, robust product because people were now paying us to do that. And for the universities, it made them sit up and think about what the real value of EThOS was. And it did allow us to do a lot of development with the funding that was coming in. But I think, certainly at the NDLTD board we've discussed, if you offer a membership service that's voluntary, you get some people signing and some people not. And the benefit of EThOS, of course, is that it's a national aggregation. So if you only focus on those institutions who pay the membership fee, and you really want the ones who don't, what do? So it was difficult to offer a two-tier service. And of course, it wasn't sustainable because we never knew from one year to the next what was going to come in terms of funding. So I think we're all delighted to say that last August, with the absolute outstanding support from both the EThOS Advisory Board, which effectively is UK higher education, and the senior management teams at the British Library, EThOS was brought fully into the British Library and is now delivered as a core service by the British Library on behalf of UK higher education. So I guess my message from this is, at some point, our projects and beta versions of services have to go one way or the other, and they have to become sustainable. So now, of course, it's entirely sustainable because it's only up to us to keep it going as much as we can. And finally, novel research uses of aggregated theses. Yesterday, Kevin suggested quite strongly that theses are so far dramatically underused. And the sheer potential for research of open access content had yet to be realised. In the last 2 years, we've worked hard, as I said at the beginning, on the basics for EThOS, the quality and quantity of the records and the full text theses, enhancing the metadata, improving our harvesting, and increasing visibility and usage of individual theses by individual researchers. Just as we thought we might be able to take our foot off the pedal and begin to relax, many people, not just Kevin, not just Peter Murray-Rust, are suddenly realising the sheer potential of the thesis corpus as a whole, both the metadata set of 350,000 records and the roughly 40 million pages of full text content. So I just wanted to mention one or two interesting projects that relate to this new development. So first, metadata. It's been suggested several times this week and elsewhere that subject classification is no longer needed as everything is indexed by Google Scholar. That's true for the individual researcher, but we are constantly being asked at EThOS to supply or make available subject-specific metadata sets to support discipline-based focused research. In the last few months, we've worked with, these are just examples, doctoral dissertations in musicology, the Art and Design Index to Theses, the College of Occupational Therapy, and Envia, an environmental science project which the British Library is a part of, and there are many more. We've also supplied 15,000 records, it may be more, I didn't supply them, of chemistry thesis metadata to the Royal Society of Chemistry, who are doing really interesting work to analyse the research trends within chemistry based on an analysis of the abstracts and other data supplied by us in the metadata. And it will be interesting to see if there's anything that they can share with us at a later date. When we look at full texts, as Peter said, the potential of them is unprecedented, and EThOS is beginning to understand the issues and opportunities. In the last week, we have been approached twice to provide theses to support first a project to apply that's applying content mining technologies to do Library of Congress subject classification using machines instead of real people. I think Peter this morning said that if we can supply the data, he would be able to do that. So we currently have around 40,000 theses which don't have any subject classification. So if this project listed here can't do it, I'm going to get Peter on board. And separately, entirely unrelated, another email asking if we would supply some theses in the field of law for a service which is developing in New Zealand that's using text mining technologies to develop language teaching tools in the field, in the specific language area of law. Really interesting text, or content mining as Peter would have us call it, examples that are just beginning to get off the ground, I think. And finally, I suspect I've overtaken my time, our most exciting activity again involves the Royal Society of Chemistry. They have a big project at the moment involving the chemistry department, not the libraries, the chemistry departments of around 20 universities in the UK, led by the University of Bristol, which is extracting compounds from PhD theses and adding that data to the open access ChemSpider database. As the National Library, and having a curatorial role for theses in the UK, our role in the project is not to supply theses and not to do the mining ourselves, but to help us and UK higher education to develop a better understanding of the methods, opportunities, challenges and copyright and other rights issues around content mining from open access PhDs. I think our colleague Kira is in the room. Are you here, Kira? Oh yeah. Kira, just there, is with us for just 4 months as a project officer on this project, and she is investigating all of the areas I've just mentioned. One of the most interesting questions following Peter Murray-Rust's challenge that universities don't want their theses to be mined is how cautious we should be, we, the British Library, we, UK higher education, should be around these new and exciting ways of using academic research. I think I'm going to stop there, so I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
So we do have time for questions right now. Does anyone have a question? We have a gentleman with a microphone who will come to you, so please wait for the gentleman with the microphone. Question? Okay, we have one in the middle.
Do you have any plans to harvest metadata from RDS systems from the different universities? For instance, at Birmingham University, we have an RDS system, Find It, which integrates our old print catalogue with our electronic resources. And we were just wondering whether or not you had plans to harvest the data from that, and then when you give us an order for a thesis, you would have, in a way, all our details already presented to us.
Okay, so if I understand you right, that's different to CRIS systems?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's actually going to our basically our OPAC, which is combined with our electronic resources, and it's all under this resource discovery system, yes, which is separate to Pure, which is our CRIS system.
Yes. So we are aware that some of our gaps in coverage is because many of the UK thesis records are held in library catalogues rather than in institutional repositories. And one of the things that we would love to do is to run a project for 2 months and take everybody's catalogue data, convert it to repository data and put it into EThOS. Unfortunately, at the moment, it is on the to-do list, but it's all down to resource. So we're just beginning to do that actually with one university, hopefully in the next few weeks. And depending on how much work that is and how successful it is, who knows, we might be able to sort of do one by one over the next year or 2 years or 3 years. So